Hello everyone and welcome back to my Crafting the Middle Ages Minecraft series, where I hope to educate and entertain you about the medieval era. In this third episode, it's going to be kind of all over the place. As you'll see, I'm opening with the building of the double arch stone bridge, which finally provides a way into the castle. Today's episode will be in 3 parts: furnishing the keep, making a few structures in the inner bailey, and finally building some various buildings in the outer bailey. Since this episode doesn't really have a theme, I'll be providing smaller tidbits of information as I go along and populate the castle with more stuff. Hopefully I'll go into more detail on most of these topics in future episodes. I hope you enjoy the third episode and have a good day. So this is what the bridge looks like when you're walking across it, and how it looks like in relation to the rest of the castle. I'm particularly fond of these little posts that I made for these hanging lanterns, and I think that this texturing of the smooth stone, the cobblestone, and the andesite, along with the regular stone, gives it a nice textured look that makes you sort of think of worn stones or worn smooth stones or rough stones or something of the sort. And this is what it looks like from the water. I thought the original arches that I had made were too pointed, so I opted for these more rounded arches a few hours after I built the bridge, actually. So it was kind of a pain climbing back up there to replace all of it, but I got it done and I think it looks better like this. So let me know what you guys think of the bridge. I'm really proud of it personally. So I think the first order of business is going to be getting the castle's undercroft storage into tip-top shape, because right now the storage situation is abysmal. I just have junk everywhere. This doesn't include all the stuff that's still sitting over at the mine. I have started on some chests for basic building materials and stuff like that, but nothing that'll let me sort any of these other sort of miscellaneous items. So I'm using these small little corner towers as storage rooms and crafting areas, and just little nooks and crannies where there's spider webs and crates and just general stuff that people shove into the corner and forget about. So I'm kind of thinking that for this half, this is going to be the storage area. I'm going to have a few sets of chests, a couple rows of chests going up here somewhere in this kind of middle area, and then on this half this is going to be the dungeon, so I'm going to have probably cells in these corners or along the walls or something like that. And I'm going to be using dirt to plan all this out, so yeah, let's just get to planning and see where it goes. I don't really have a plan in mind right now, but all I know is I really want just the rows of chests going up and down this sort of middle central area. Since we're starting in the castle's keep, what rooms did a keep usually have? As always, I think I should point out that a keep's rooms and contents largely depended on the wealth of the lord. Usually, however, they contained a few similarities, such as a lord's bedroom, a great hall, a storage room, a kitchen, a garderobe, which is a toilet, a tiny chapel room, or an oratory, and even a dungeon. All of these, as I said before, depend on the wealth of the lord and what they specifically desire in their castle. My keep, however, will have a dungeon, a storage room, a great hall, a barracks room, a map room, an enchanting room, and finally, my bedroom. You'll notice I swapped a few of the rooms. This is still Minecraft after all, and I would like some typical Minecraft base rooms. Starting in the undercroft, this space was underneath the entire keep. Notice my undercroft is not actually underground, just underneath the entire keep structure. Earlier medieval keeps kept a kitchen, a storage room, and a dungeon in the undercroft, but my keep only has the storage area and dungeon. Later concentric castles moved the kitchen out of the undercroft or side room and made them into their own dedicated buildings, as you'll see later. The storage room was obviously where the keep would contain certain things like grain, salted meats, and casks of wine, beer, and mead. Since the undercroft was already used for storage of foods, prisoners could be kept there as well. If they were particularly noble, they would be treated quite well with daily meals and a bed. One prisoner at Skipton Castle said at his trial that he was never fed so well as in Lord Clifford's custody. However, if the prisoner was of no use to the lord, they'd be thrown in the oubliette, which is French for to forget. It was a cramped hole with no sunlight and no room to move. What a grim fate that must have been. Moving up one floor was the Great Hall. The Great Hall was where the life of the castle was. Here, the royal family entertained guests and exchanged news. For guests, as with everything in the medieval age, there was a seating hierarchy. Those closest to the lord, such as guests and lesser nobles, would be seated closest, while serfs and musicians would be farther away. If you could reach the salt cellar, you were above the salt and within the lord's important inner circle. However, if you could not, you were considered below the salt. Great halls usually included a fireplace or hearth to keep guests warm, and sometimes the servants would even sleep on the floor on straw mats if the hall was particularly large. The structure of this room in particular is notable since this was the room to receive guests in. Nobles wanted to make a good impression. Thus, the walls and the ceiling are usually high. There was also a raised stage at the end of the room called the dais, where the lord would sit. In addition to being a place of merriment, it was often used as a courtroom as well. As said before, these great halls would sometimes have kitchens attached in a side room like the one at Skipton Castle. On the next floor, we'll find the map room and the barracks for the castle's garrison. I'm not 100% certain having a barracks or garrison room inside the castle keep is historically accurate, to be honest. However, with my research saying most servants slept either inside the keep itself or somewhere within the castle's bailey, it doesn't seem too far of a stretch to have the garrison sleep inside the castle keep. It is important here, while talking about the garrison, to note that they were not fully staffed all the time due to expenses. Lords and nobles often reduced garrisons in times of peace and recruited or raised garrisons and armies in times of war. David Cornell writes in his PhD thesis on English garrisons, "The rapid reduction of garrisons upon periods of truce or peace reflects the burdensome cost of retaining such large forces." For example, in the same thesis, the garrison at Roxburgh Castle fluctuated from as high as 300 men in 1400 to as little as 27 men in May 1304. These include bannerets, knights, men-at-arms, crossbowmen, and archers. Many concentric castles often kept their barracks as a separate building in the outer bailey. My barracks serve also as a space for storing my weapons and armor, so it doubles as an armory. The map room, however, is just for detail, and who doesn't love looking at a fully fleshed out map of their base? On the last and final floor, we have the oratory, the enchanting room, and the lord's bedroom. The oratory is simply just a small, private room for prayer reserved for the lord and his family. I encountered one at Clifford's Tower in York. Moving on, the enchanting room is for, enchanting your armor and weapons. Finally, there's the lord's bedroom, also called the solaire. The Great Hall, as mentioned before, was a space with lots of activity, lots of people coming and going. Eventually some, particularly the nobles, felt there was a need for a quieter space for relaxation. The solaire was just such a place. It was where the lord and his family could relax in privacy, often furnished with beds, tables, chairs, tapestries, rugs, closets, and even a fireplace. I'm including a private toilet in mine and a small armory just to fill in the space. There are lots of confusing terms here. A medieval toilet is called a privy or a garderobe, whilst a medieval closet used for storing clothes is also called a garderobe, from the French garde des robes, meaning robes or clothing protector. This is because it was believed in medieval times that the ammonia from the toilet would protect the clothes from pests such as fleas. With the lord's bedroom finished, the castle keep is now fully furnished and ready to be used as a space for mingling, relaxation, and administering the law. Yeah, so for right now, I'm just kind of stumped with what to do with this big open space, so if you guys have any ideas or suggestions of what I could kind of fill this space with, then leave a comment down below. I will read and consider every single suggestion because, I don't know, I'm not running out of ideas, but just this space kind of eludes me. We'll figure it out soon enough. No pressure. Moving outside the keep, you'll find the inner bailey, where the most important functions and external buildings were contained. My castle's inner bailey is rather confined, so I'll only be putting a kitchen and a well out here for now, but perhaps I'll put some more things in at a later date. The well is a well. It's a hole on the ground that holds water. Wells were used to provide drinking water to the castle's inhabitants, and they were especially useful during a siege when access into and out of the castle was limited and dangerous. The kitchen was also an important part of the castle's daily functions. It provided the lord, his family, his retinue, and his guests with food. The castle staff would serve meats such as game birds from hunting, fish from fishing, fruits and vegetables from farming and foraging, and grains from local farms. Large animals such as pigs were cooked on a spit in huge fireplaces, and soups were cooked in cauldrons. Take a look at this fireplace I saw in Skipton Castle. Kitchens also had a smaller, separate bread oven, sometimes multiple, since bread was considered to be an easy, staple food to make. Castle kitchens contained a lot of what you'd find in today's kitchens: containers for food, hanging meats, bowls, and cups. People often ate with their hands, which is why I left utensils out of that list. But make no mistake, they used knives to carve up meats and spoons to scoop grains and fruits. Eating with utensils was seen as unclean because others would think your hands weren't clean enough to eat from. So I finally think that the external kitchen building of my castle is ready and awaiting staff. So basically, this is the ground floor. I made it kind of an arch just so the kitchen staff can get bigger plates in and, up the stairs during a rush if they have royal visitors. Here is the fireplace. Here's the storage. Here's just a mug of some liquid. I don't really know what's in there. Cauldron of water if they need it. And just some furnaces for cooking various foods. These are the stairs up to the servants' quarters or the kitchen staff's quarters. As you can see, they have a variety of decorations, some storage, and a furnace for their own food, a nice soft carpet, and some bedding. This is where the chimney runs through from the fireplace on the ground floor, and it obviously goes all the way up through the roof. So yeah, I think this build is very compact and it required quite a bit of critical thinking on my end, which my brain does not enjoy ever, but I'm proud of it. I'm particularly proud of, how I was able to pull off such a detailed build, in my opinion, in such a small space. I think the clay is very nice for the wattle and daub kind of look of the building, and I'm just overall proud of just how much, stuff I managed to cram within, basically this amount of space. Finally, we enter the last remaining section of the castle, the outer bailey. In my outer bailey, I've chosen to construct stables, a blacksmith, and a chapel for now. My stables can hold 5 horses or donkeys and is made from a stone wall ground floor to keep the animals inside safe during a siege or bad weather. In the Middle Ages, horses weren't referred to their breed as in modern times, but rather by the job that they had. Emma Herbert-Davies' Thesis lists the various types. A destrier was a high-status horse reserved for carrying fully armed knights into battle. A rouncey was used by the men-at-arms. A courser was a horse similar to the destrier, but cheaper and used for hunting and tournaments. Palfreys were riding horses used by the nobility, costing almost as much as a courser. A sumpter is a pack horse, while stots and affers were used for plowing fields and agricultural work, the lowest of the low on the hierarchy. European knights preferred stallions for war, whilst others, such as the Moors and Mongols, used mares. There were even a handful of authors on horse care in the medieval age, such as Jordanus Rufus and Pietro de Crescenzi, both writing in the 13th century. Jordanus notes that colts in training, while stabled, should have straw bedding, while Pietro says wooden partitions should be erected while the horses are stabled, to prevent fighting, biting, and kicking. In the 7th century, stirrups, allowing mounted riders to not fall off the horse while fighting and riding, were introduced to Europe from foreign invaders. William the Conqueror required over 2,000 horses to cross the Channel for his 1066 invasion of England. I'll hold off on more detail for another video, but as you can see, horses were used for war, transporting goods, and agricultural work, in addition to serving as symbols of status and wealth for their riders. They were the tanks, cars, and harvesters of the medieval age. Blacksmiths were probably very busy in castles and villages, and they were an essential part of everyday life prior to the invention of factories and mechanized production. Blacksmiths had to make pretty much every single metal piece that's used in a castle. iron tools, armor, weapons, door hinges, window frames, horseshoes, nails, and probably even things like cauldrons and spits for cooking. To make some of these items, blacksmiths used methods like welding to join pieces of metal, filing to make smooth edges, and casting to make shapes and forms. Common tools in a blacksmith's workshop would be a hammer, an anvil, tongs, a forge, and bellows. The skill of blacksmithing was considered to be one of the arts mechanicae, or the 7 mechanical arts, which were physically demanding and lowly skills. These contrasted the arts liberalis, or the liberal arts, which were more inclined to literature, mathematics, and music. Although they were invaluable members of villages, towns, cities, and castles due to their metalworking expertise, some considered them to be annoyances. There's actually an anonymous poem titled A Complaint Against the Blacksmiths from the 14th century. In it, the author complains about the swart-smutted smiths, smattered with smoke, drive me to death with din of their dints. Such noise on nights, nay, heard men never. However, this didn't stop communities from having a blacksmith, as D.W. Wright writes. While practical considerations such as the noise, smell, and risk of fire could have played a part in the positioning of forges within high-status centers, it should be recognized that such factors did not always dissuade lower-status communities incorporating iron smithies into the very heart of their settlements. There are also a few blacksmithing saints and bishops, as Wright identifies in his paper. Blacksmiths didn't do absolutely everything on certain pieces of metal, however. For example, if a blacksmith made an arrowhead, he'd give the said arrowhead to a fletcher to attach it to a wooden shaft to make an arrow. For a gold trim on armor, they took the piece to a goldsmith. Thus, certain occupations specified in very specific things. The history and language development of chapels is very, very long, intricate, and difficult to follow, as Gillian Valence Mackey's book demonstrates. They seem to have served many flexible purposes, as the different Latin words for chapel show. Some examples are cubiculum, as in a side room, or oratorium, as in prayer, which reflect the different functions that these rooms had. In the 4th century, chapels started out as protective buildings over the sites of martyrs' bodies or the site of their martyrdom in order to protect the holiness of the site. These were usually located outside of city walls, such as in Rome, where Roman law forbade people to be buried inside the city. Chapels were also side rooms in churches, related to the word cubiculum, that served as private spaces for prayer. Finally, they also served as burial places for royals and their families. Later, as Christianity's power and finances grew, the church was able to spread their influence through monastic and ecclesiastical buildings. In the medieval age, chapels allowed smaller communities to have access to religious services, and chapels were usually smaller in size than churches and cathedrals. In a castle context, chapels were sometimes an external building, such as at Skipton Castle, or placed above the gatehouse in order to place God's protection over the most vulnerable part of the castle. Just like castles, chapels also have a few things that make them a chapel, but these characteristics are also shared by churches and cathedrals. The first is an altar where people can place offerings. The second is a nave, which is the main body where people perform worship. The third is a font of holy water near the entrance, allowing people to be baptized. And the fourth are stained glass windows to allow the illiterate to learn Christian scripture. The chapel within my castle is going to be dedicated to my in-game deceased cat, Saint Cataline, who was martyred when a skeleton shot an arrow at her. May she rest in peace and watch over my castle in these trying times. Now that my castle's furnished and I have all the buildings needed for crucial castle functions, I'm not exactly sure where to go next. I was thinking of starting on a lakeside village outside the castle's wall, a mountaintop monastery, or perhaps on a nether portal temple. These ideas will obviously be themed and revolve around medieval history in some way, as usual. Oh well, at least I have some options. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, I hope you learned something today, and I'll see you in the next one.